Montana Territory, 1876. The wind came hard off the Bitterroot Range that morning, sending dust flying across the valley floor as Colt Parmer rode into the burned-out remnants of a stage stop he used to know. His horse stepped light over charred wood and shattered glass. He stayed quiet, not calling out. A place like this did not stay empty for long, not in these parts. Bandits, desperate folks, ghosts of the war. Something always filled the silence. Colt dismounted and ran his hand over the blackened porch rail. He remembered the way Martha used to lean there, coffee in one hand, baby on her hip, sun catching the red in her hair. That was over 9 years ago, before the fever took her, before he quit believing love could last in a world like this. He turned his head when he heard a soft shuffle from behind the barn, cautious but fast. He reached for the Colt on his hip, then paused. A woman stepped into view. Her dress was torn at the hem, and her boots were caked with mud. She carried a boy on her back, no older than 6, thin as a fence rail. Another child, a girl maybe 4, clung to her skirt with both hands. Her face was smudged, but her eyes were wide and sharp. Colt kept his voice low. "You alone out here?" She looked at him like she was weighing the truth against the danger. Then she nodded. "We were with a wagon train. It was attacked 3 days ago. I ran. We ran." Colt glanced over the children. The boy's face was flushed with fever. The girl had a cut above her brow that looked days old, crusted over, but not healing right. The woman shifted the boy higher on her back, her arms shaking from the strain. "We just need somewhere to rest," she whispered, voice cracking on the edge of it. Colt felt something shift in his chest. That quiet ache he thought he had buried deep. He stepped forward, slow. "You can come with me. My cabin's east, near the river. It's not much, but it's safe." She hesitated, chin tight. Then she nodded once. They moved out fast. Colt lifted the boy onto his saddle and pulled the girl up behind him. The mother walked beside them, one hand on the reins, the other never leaving her daughter's back. They rode for hours under the wide Montana sky. The sun dipped low, turning the mountains to gold. The boy, whose name was Amos, slept most of the ride. The girl, Addie, clung silently to Colt's waist. The woman said her name was Susanna Whitlow. She was 23, from Kansas, and her husband had died back in Dodge from a lung infection, leaving her to chase a new start westward. "I thought there'd be more kindness out here," she said, not looking at him. "I thought God might meet me halfway." Colt did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded and kept riding. By nightfall, they reached the small cabin Colt had built himself 6 years back. He carried the boy inside, laid him on the cot, and fetched water from the creek. Susanna followed without a word, setting Addie down gently on a blanket near the hearth. Colt stoked the fire and handed Susanna a tin of beans and jerky. She took it with shaking hands, eyes wet in the firelight. "You hurt?" he asked. She looked up at him, surprised. He nodded at her arm. "You are holding it strange." She glanced down. "I think it got twisted when we ran." "I can manage." Colt crossed the room, took her hand, and turned her arm gently. The wrist was swollen, skin bruised deep. He wrapped it tight with clean cloth, then reached for a small tin of salve. Her breath hitched as he worked, but she did not flinch. When he was done, she whispered, "Thank you." He looked up then, his eyes meeting hers. "You are safe now. I will see to that." She leaned back, finally letting her shoulders drop. "You do not even know us." He stood. "You needed help." "That is enough." That night, Colt sat by the fire with his rifle across his lap, watching over the small family asleep on his floor. He had not let anyone close in years, not since Martha. But something about the way Susanna had looked at him, tired, scared, but still holding on, made the silence inside him feel less heavy. At dawn, he cooked simple cornmeal cakes and fetched more water from the creek. Susanna stirred first, brushing the hair from Addie's face, her wrist stiff in its wrapping. "You do not owe us anything," she said. Colt poured her coffee. "Maybe not. But I would like you to stay. Until the boy is better. As long as you want." She looked at him like she was trying hard not to hope. "You sure?" He met her eyes. "I am." Susanna's lip quivered. She reached out and took the tin cup from his hand. Their fingers brushed. Her touch was warm, strong despite everything. Then, for the first time since he buried Martha, Colt felt something stir in him again. Something real. He did not say it aloud. Not yet. But he knew. He was not alone anymore. The morning after the fever broke, Amos opened his eyes and asked for water. Colt handed him the tin cup without a word, watching the boy's lips tremble as he drank. Susanna knelt beside her son, her hand on his chest, counting the steady rise and fall. She didn't speak, but her shoulders sank with a relief too deep for words. Outside, frost clung to the scrub grass. The sky stretched pale and windless above the pines. Colt stepped out to fetch firewood, and Addie followed behind him, silent as her shadow. She didn't ask questions, just watched with wide eyes as he split kindling and laid it in the crook of his arm. "You want to carry some?" he asked, crouching beside her. She nodded, holding out both arms. He gave her the smallest bundle, and she marched it back toward the door, her chin lifted like she was handling something precious. When Colt returned to the cabin, Susanna was stirring corn mash over the hearth. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, and her hair, brushed now, hung in a single braid down her back. The lines around her mouth were softer than they'd been the day before. "You sleep at all?" he asked, hanging his coat on the peg. "A little," she said. "Kept waking to check on him." "Habit, I guess." He moved to the bench near the fire. "You'll have to let yourself rest too." She glanced at him. "I will. Just, not quite yet." Addie climbed into her lap, and Susanna wrapped her arm around the girl, holding her close. It was quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that didn't press in, but settled like a blanket. Colt looked at Susanna's wrist. The swelling had gone down some, but it still looked painful. "I've got willow bark," he said. "Steep it strong. Good for the ache." She gave a small nod. "Thank you." He stood, pulling the tin box from the shelf and setting water to boil. While it brewed, he pulled on his gloves. "There's an old snare line I haven't checked in weeks. I'll bring back what I can." She looked up. "You sure you should go alone?" "I've done it before." Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer than necessary. "Just be careful." He tipped his hat and left before the warmth in his chest could rise too far. The trail cut north through a thin stand of aspen. Snow lingered in patches where the sun hadn't reached. Colt moved quiet, boots crunching over frost-bitten leaves, rifle slung across his back. He found 2 rabbits in the snares and a squirrel half taken by a fox. He left that one for the scavengers. By the time he circled back, the sun had climbed a little higher, melting the ice from the creek stones. When he returned, Susanna had hung the wash to dry on a line he hadn't known she'd strung. Shirts, a worn chemise, a child's blanket all flapping slowly in the breeze. It surprised him how natural it looked against the backdrop of pine and sky. He cleaned the rabbits out back, and when he stepped inside with the meat wrapped in cloth, she was setting the table with carved wooden bowls. "I found some dried onions in your pantry," she said. "Hope you don't mind." "Not at all," Colt said, hanging the cloth near the stove. "You cook better than I do. That much is clear." She smiled, just slightly, and it changed her whole face. That night, after the children were asleep, Susanna sat by the fire, her legs tucked beneath her. Colt sat across from her, whittling a strip of pine into the shape of a small horse. The cabin was warm with the scent of stew and wood smoke. "Do you ever go into town?" she asked. "Only when I have to," Colt said. "Supplies, maybe once a season. Nearest place is Darby, 2 days out." She nodded slowly. "I used to like towns. The noise, the bustle of it. Now I can't stand them." Colt set the carving down. "What changed?" She stared into the flames. "After everything fell apart, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Faces that turned away, doors that didn't open. Like people had already decided what kind of woman I was." He didn't interrupt. He just listened. "I didn't run west looking for gold or land," she said. "I just wanted a place where my children wouldn't be looked at like burdens. Where I could be enough." "You are," Colt said, his voice low. "You're more than enough." She looked up at him then, something unguarded passing between them. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. He cleared his throat. "I'll sleep near the door tonight, just in case anything stirs." She didn't argue, but before she turned in, she stepped close, her hand brushing his as she passed him the blanket he'd lent her. "Good night, Colt," she said, soft as breath. He watched her walk away, the faint scent of her hair lingering in the air, and knew, clearer than he'd known anything in years, that he wanted her to stay for more reasons than he could yet name. The first snow came early that year, falling soft before dawn and settling light on the eaves. When Susanna stepped outside to gather wood, the ground was dusted in white, and her breath curled in the air. She pulled her shawl tighter and moved toward the stack Colt had chopped days before. He was already there, sleeves rolled, frost clinging to his hair. He passed her an armful without a word, and she took it, careful not to jostle her healing wrist. "A storm's coming behind it," Colt said, glancing to the west where the peaks were already hidden behind a wall of gray. "You and the children'll stay warm inside?" She nodded once. "I've kept worse at bay with less." His eyes stayed on her a moment longer. Then he bent to finish the chore. Inside, Amos sat propped against a quilt, tracing a carved wooden horse with his fingers. Addie sat beside him, tongue between her teeth as she sewed crooked stitches into a square of calico. Susanna watched from the hearth, hands folded in her lap, but her thoughts ran elsewhere. Colt returned before midday with 2 hares and a bundle of juniper. He hung his coat by the door and rubbed warmth back into his fingers. "I'll smoke the meat," he said. "Keep it from spoiling if the road stays blocked." She stepped close to take the hares from him, their hands brushing. "You always think ahead. Only way to last out here," he said, watching her eyes, the way they softened at the edges. That evening, after stew and quiet laughter from the children's corner, Susanna poured warm water into a basin. She scrubbed the floor with a worn rag, leaning carefully on her knees. Colt moved to take the cloth from her. "You don't need to do that," he said. "I know," she replied, rinsing the rag. "But I want to. It feels good to have something clean under us." He crouched beside her, dipping the second rag into the basin without asking. They worked in silence, side by side, the fire crackling behind them. The floor shone by lamplight when they were done. Later, when the children were asleep and the wind began to rise outside, Colt pulled the shutters tighter. Susanna stood near the stove, rubbing her arms. "You ever think about leaving Montana?" she asked. He leaned against the doorframe. "Used to. Thought about drifting south. Arizona territory, maybe. But you stayed. Too many ghosts further east. Out here, they keep their distance." She turned to him. "You ever wish things had gone different?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the cot where Amos slept, then to Susanna's face, lit by the low flame. "I did," he said finally. "Now I'm not so sure." She stepped toward him, her voice lowered. "I keep wondering what kind of life I'm building for them. If it's enough." Colt met her eyes. "It's more than enough," he said. "They've got you. That's a damn good start." Her hand rose, slow, and rested against his chest. He didn't move, just let it settle there, right over his heartbeat. "You're kind," she whispered. "No," he said. "Just not blind." They stood there, the wind pressing against the cabin walls, the fire dimming behind them. He raised his hand and covered hers where it lay. Neither of them spoke, but something new passed between them, quiet and sure. When Colt finally turned down his bedroll that night, he lay staring at the rafters, the scent of juniper and wood smoke thick in the air. He didn't know what name to give the feeling in his chest, but it hadn't been there in years. It no longer felt like something passing through. It felt like something beginning. The wind had changed. It came down from the mountains with a sharper edge, carrying the bite of deeper winter. Colt noticed it first in the way the smoke from the chimney curled tighter, stubborn to rise. He stacked the last of the firewood against the wall, then closed the door with care, not wanting to wake Amos, who'd fallen asleep with a rag doll nestled under one arm, something Susanna had sewn together from an old shirt and a scrap of wool stuffing. Colt's boots made barely a sound across the plank floor as he crossed to where Susanna stood at the table, knife in hand, slicing strips of cloth. Her braid had come loose near the nape, and a few strands clung to her neck. She didn't look up until he was close enough to see the slow rhythm of her breath. "You're mending again," he said, quieter than usual. "Addie's hem tore on the step," she answered, fingers working steady. "No sense waiting for it to get worse." He leaned a hip against the table. "You always stay busy." "I have to," she said simply. "If I stop too long, it all starts creeping back." Her voice carried the weight of something specific, something that hadn't been spoken yet. Colt didn't press. He pulled out the chair across from her, sat down, and picked up the other half of the torn skirt. "Show me how to stitch this right." She blinked, then passed the needle across the table. "You thread it first." His fingers were rougher than hers, but steady. He got the thread through on the second try. When he looked up, she was watching him with something new in her eyes, not surprise, not amusement. a kind of steadiness, a quiet knowing. "You been alone long?" she asked. He gave a slow nod. "Since the 3rd year of the war. Not much made sense after. Makes sense now." He met her gaze. "Some things do. These little ones. That's more than I expected." Her hand paused mid-stitch, then resumed. "I didn't think anyone would make room for us again. Not after everything. What happened out there before you got here?" She set the fabric down. Her eyes stayed on the table. "There was a man," she said. "He called himself kind, said he'd help us get west. I believed that for a while. But he started talking like I owed him. That's why we left the last town. I couldn't let him near my children again." Colt's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. He just reached for the cloth and kept stitching, slower than she did, but careful. She watched him for a moment, then looked away, blinking hard. "I'm not scared of being alone," she said. "I just don't want to raise them in fear. I want them to know what safety feels like." "They'll know," he said. "They already do." She didn't reply, but she reached across the table and covered his hand. Her palm was calloused, warm. He didn't pull away. That night, after the fire settled low and the children were curled under quilts, Susanna stepped outside. Colt followed her a few minutes later, pulling his coat close. The snow had stopped, and the stars were coming out, faint behind the clouds. She was standing near the edge of the clearing, looking up toward the mountains. He stepped beside her. "You miss Kansas?" he asked. "I miss the sound of grass and the wind," she said. "But I don't think I want to go back." He nodded. "I never had a plan to stay here. Just stopped moving one day, and the place took hold." She turned toward him, arms folded against the cold. "You think it could hold more than you?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "It already does." She stepped closer, close enough that her voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know what comes next, but I feel safer here than I have in a long time." He looked at her, the way her breath curled in the air, the way her eyes didn't waver. "Then stay," he said. "Not just until spring. Not just while the storm holds. Stay." She didn't speak. She just leaned into him, resting her brow against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, careful but sure. The wind moved through the trees, but it didn't touch them. Inside, the cabin held its warmth. And for the first time in years, so did he. The thaw came slow that year, creeping in along the earth's edges like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The snow didn't vanish in a day, but melted in uneven patches, leaving the ground soft and slick. When the last frost pulled back from the creek, Colt found the banks swollen and the current fast, but the water ran clear, and that mattered most. Susanna stood near the garden bed one morning, sleeves rolled, turning the dirt with a rusted spade Colt had sharpened for her. Her brow was furrowed, not from strain but from thought. He brought her a folded seed sack beans, hearty ones that could root even in tired soil. She brushed her hands clean and took the sack. "I didn't think we'd still be here come planting time." "You thinking of leaving now that the road's clear?" Colt asked, not accusing, just steady. She didn't meet his eyes. "No, just hadn't planned on having a place that felt mine." He stepped beside her, the sun catching the wear in his coat. "It does now." She nodded, "Just once." "It does." Colt didn't say anything more. He just knelt and helped her press the beans into the earth. Amos had kept mostly to his drawing slate since his fever, sketching simple things: a rabbit, a wheel, the outline of the cabin door. Today, he brought Colt a picture of a horse and handed it over without a word. Colt crouched to eye level. "She yours?" he asked. Amos shrugged. "She's fast." Colt studied the lines. "You give her a name?" The boy thought for a moment. "Junie." Colt nodded. "Good name. Maybe we'll find her one day." Susanna watched from the porch, her hand resting on the latch. She didn't interrupt. Her eyes held something quiet and full as she watched Colt and her son speak. Later that week, Colt took the wagon north to Darby for flour, salt, and nails. He returned with more than he'd planned: a bolt of muslin, a small jar of molasses, and a pair of sturdy shoes that might last Addie 2 seasons if her feet didn't grow too fast. When he lifted the bolt from the wagon bed, Susanna paused, her hands cradling a mixing bowl. "That's not on your list," she said, her voice unreadable. "No," Colt agreed. "Figured you might want it anyhow. For curtains or a dress, if you're inclined." She stepped forward, fingers brushing the folded cloth. "You don't owe us anything. I know that." She looked up, eyes steady. "But you keep giving. So do you." She folded the cloth, quiet a moment. I never expected to find a man who didn't see us as trouble. Colt leaned against the rail. Might be I see you as something else entirely. She stepped closer. What do you see? He didn't look away. You. A woman who kept her children fed through a war, a man, and a winter. A woman who still smiles at her daughter's lopsided stitching and knows the angle of every cloud. You're not trouble, Susanna. You're the kind of steady I forgot existed. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she reached for his hand, fingers lacing into his. I want to stay. Not just the season. Not just until the next storm. He squeezed her hand. Then stay. For good. That evening, after supper, Colt brought out the small carved horse Amos had first held weeks ago. He'd sanded it smooth, etched the mane with care, and stained the wood the color of honey bark. He handed it to the boy, who turned it over in his hands with wide eyes. Addie tugged at her mother's skirt. Do we get to live here forever? Susanna knelt, brushing Addie's hair behind her ear. Yes, sweetheart. We do. Colt stepped forward, kneeling beside them. I'd like to marry your mama. That all right with you too? Amos looked up. Can we still plant beans? You can plant the whole garden. Addie tilted her head. Will you still make the fire in the morning? Every morning, Colt said. They both nodded solemnly, as if granting permission from some higher place. Susanna laughed, and the sound was light, full in a way it hadn't been since the start. A week later, under the cottonwood that shaded the cabin's west side, they stood close while Colt spoke the words he'd thought over for days. The only witness was the wind, and the children's hands tangled in wildflowers behind them. He didn't promise her riches or ease, just a place, a life, a kind of quiet that would hold through seasons and storms. She answered him without hesitation, her voice low and sure. They kissed once, not for show, not for ceremony, but because it was time. Spring settled in slow but certain. The beans sprouted, the roof held against the rain, and the creek's rush softened to a murmur. Inside the cabin, shelves filled with jars and stitched linens. Amos built a perch for a bird that never came. Addie asked a new question each day, and Susanna answered every one. Colt carved a new chair, one that fit beside hers at the fire. And when the nights grew long again, no one feared the cold. They had made something lasting. They had made home.